Okay, in Visual Studio Code, you can get every tag, every string, every line, everything on the page the exact color that you want it to be. And chances are you loaded up a few of the color packs from the extensions, and they'll get you most of the way there, but then there's that one tag that's just bugging the hell out of you, and you want to change it, and you've arrived at this video. And so it's not a straightforward process, like at all. It's not like the legacy programs where you would go into what is it, settings and preferences, and then dig around in preferences until you find text editor, and then eventually you'll find a setting. No, it's totally not like that. And so you have to understand how the entire platform works, and then actually it's very simple, and you'll be on your way a lot sooner than trying to struggle with it. As of this video, there's absolutely nothing about it, and so that's why I'm making this video. There's a few things that just scratch on the surface, but it's mostly it's just garbage. And most basically everything on YouTube right now is just showing how to install a color pack. It doesn't show you how to change individual tag colors. So let's do that now. So the first thing you need to understand is that we're working with style assignments. And so it's just like a web page. When you look at a web page, you want to know what's making this color. Sorry, I didn't mean to click into that. So when you're looking at a web page and you want to inspect a certain font or an image or whatever, and you have your debugger over here on the right, just right mouse click on that and you inspect it, and then I'll shoot you to the part where it'll expose the name of the style, and then that style leads down to the style sheet, and that's how that element is being controlled on the front end. So it's basically that three-layer process. You've got your front end, you've got what points to it, and then you've got what defines it here. So the same thing is happening in VS Code, and so let's take a look at that real quick. We've got our front end here, and this is the one that I've been working with. Let's look at this JavaScript file. And so when we go in here and look at the JavaScript, this is not a color pack. This is actually the default theme. When I go into my preferences, that's Control-Shift-P will get you into the command prompt with a caret, and that's when you can type in commands like that. Otherwise, you're going to end up with just a general search, and that's not exactly where you want to be. And so you want to be in there. Oh, I didn't mean to open that. So let's open up a Control-Shift-P, and then I'm going into color theme, and this is of course how you just change your standard color theme. But what this theme is based off, the way I got all these colors the way I wanted it, is by altering the default theme. And so right now this the language pack that I use is also based off this theme. So you have to make that connection of sometimes you'll be working with a default theme, and if you're going to do that, definitely back it up, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute here. But if you've loaded up a language pack, and then also that includes either an extension, or you've loaded up an extension that does the colors and you want to adjust that, those are two different places to adjust it. So it's getting very complicated, so let's get started here. If you're going to modify one of the default themes, then of course that's probably the easiest way for you to start is going to wherever you installed Visual Studio Code. Mine was on a different hard drive, and so yours will be slightly different, but I will paste this entire path in the description of this video. So start out in your installation directory, and then go into resources, and then into app, and then into extensions, and then all the way down in extensions to theme defaults. And in theme defaults is yet another themes, and in here, when your first time in here, it'll be just straight up JSON files, and I recommend you back up just the entire folder. Just back the entire thing up, either WinRAR or whatever your method of backup is. Just do that. As you can see, I've already done that with a few files, as I knew I would be doing that or tinkering within here. And so that dark theme, the one that I just showed you, the one that I'm using, the color theme, this dark default actually uses 3 different files. And so that was probably just an organizational call on the developers, but it was actually kind of a hassle. And so it uses dark VS, dark plus, and dark default. And that's what I have open over here in this second instant. Dark VS, dark plus and also dark default. Dark default appears to be like header information. The other one is like more extensive. The dark plus is more extensive markups, and then the dark VS is the very general stuff, like general font stuff, the scopes, and then different settings for those scopes for different general markups. And those you can run in real quick and find what you want. But the way that you find things in the system is what I'll cover next. So let's say that I want to change this color of this function right here, and I don't know what its style is. I have to open up the style viewer, and so that's Control Shift P or Control or Command Shift P, whatever that is on Mac, and then start typing in developer. And as soon as you start typing in developer, it'll start the autocompletes for you, and you'll see inspect TM scopes. So you're going to be working with that quite a bit. Inspect TM scopes, and when I click on that, that opens up the scope inspector for me. And so whenever I click on something on this page, then that will expose what it is. But sometimes it's really general, so you'll end up tracing down a lot of stuff. And then this is the full scope. Sometimes it'll only give you the actual scope without the full path. And so that's some of the troubleshooting that you'll just have to go through trial and error, especially if you're using an extension that isn't very well organized, because I found that out about the guy that made mine was actually very sloppy. And so I went just back to one of the defaults, and then things worked out a lot smoother. Enough about that. So let's say that we want to change the color of this right here. So a lot of times when you click on it immediately, either that or function, you'll end up with a punctuation. And so you need to make sure that whatever you're selecting actually appears in the top here. So I'm just going to use the keyboard here, and then I'm going to select part of the word function. So now I know for sure that the tag inspector, the scope inspector, whatever this thing is selecting from that exact element. And so it's saying that it's storage type function.js, and fortunately this is copy paste. You can get that out of there. And so that's how I'm adjusting. That's the style that controls the color of that element. And so that's storage type function JS. I'm not sure why it would be a storage element, but that's what it is. And so when we go to try and find that, we'll look in one of our 3 files over here, and let's find that here. And then there's one iteration of it. So let's just find that again just for demonstration's sake. So just do a Control F for me. I've already changed my shortcuts. So whatever opens up your search, you want to do that, and then type in the scope. Make sure there's no trailing spaces. A lot of times it does leave a trailing space, and then you'll find your scope. And you can see where I've set it here to this lime green. And so let's just change that to a bright red real quick, just for the sake of demonstration. And so what you have to do, unfortunately, is close up VS Code. And that's why I have 2 instances running here. One where I'm editing the code and sniffing out the things that are in the language pack, and one is the style sheet over here on the right hand side. And so what I have to do is each time you change something, you have to reload Visual Studio Code. So that's what I'm going to do. And then fortunately you can at least get back to the same folder. It doesn't reopen everything for you. I don't think you can at this point, because I searched that and it didn't work out. And so you'll just get in the habit of reloading. And so that's where I just changed that function to red. And so that's once again, we just went into our inspect TM scopes, and then you click on whatever you want to change. Make sure you're selecting just part of it, and then you'll know because it's displayed up here. The word gets displayed up here. Like let's say I'm going for this function here, then I want to make sure that it's displayed up here, and I don't select the whole thing and end up with the punctuation that was at the end, which is actually an open parentheses. And so because you can change that color too, you can see that the punctuation is that scope, and if I wanted to change that scope I could. But incidentally, I've got a package installed that does the brackets automatically for you, so that supersedes anything that you would type in. And so let's do the last example. So let's just recap that. You're sniffing it down in the scope examiner here. Then you're going over to your style sheet and finding that exact same scope, and then you're assigning the color here in the foreground color. You can assign, I believe, a background color as well. I'm not sure, but whatever. And so that's how you get all the different functions the way that you want the colors the way you want them, if your color pack isn't working out for you. So I'm going to change this back here real quick to what I had originally set that to. Now let's do a more tricky example of one that didn't actually exist. And so let me find that one. I think it was over here, whereas the setting didn't actually exist. Let's go over to, okay, so here was an example of one of those. Let's find out where that thing is first, because it was this scope. Let's go into view scope. That's the hardest part, is the ones that don't have an assignment. And so variables property JS, let's see if I already did that here. Okay, so that's why this is indented out here. So this didn't even exist, and I'm going to just blow that away here and then save that. And let me save that on a notepad somewhere so I don't lose it. Okay, so let's restart VS Code and show you an example of what you will run into in some cases. So when I go back into that JavaScript file, that will be where I was, because the default theme didn't define that element. And so let's go, or didn't define that scope, style, whatever you want to call it. And so now it's all changed to this blue, whereas this light blue, whereas before you saw that it was a darker blue, because that's what I had assigned it to. So when I go in here and I go into my style inspector, inspect TM scopes, and then I get onto the variable that I want to assign, then I can see that it's variable other property, and the one that I was assigning was variable other property JS, variable other object JS. So that doesn't actually exist. Let's go into document and see if it's the same thing. Yes, it is. And so variable other object JS. So when we want to go in here, and we already know that the majority was in this file anyway, and we do a search on it, doesn't exist. It's not there. It's not there like at all. And so what you do is you just copy another one from another area, and then you can, because you can see most of the scopes are in here. Like when you go across like the variables and stuff, you can, that was what can clue you in. You kind of have to start tracing things, because some of them are just a general variable, okay, and that's not much to go on until you see that it kind of relates here, and it won't always be exact. Sometimes you just have to keep hacking on it until you find the right scope, and then just incidentally I guessed at it being a JS to assign it to the JS file and not the rest of the files being globally. So that's how you keep your file extensions sorted out. So that's one of the last things I'll show you here in this video. And so what you do is, because I wanted to change that color, just select that entire scope that is down here. So in this case, we're not using this line. We're not using that. And also, if you're having trouble finding a particular scope, like let's say that there's 7 different variables here. Let's do that. So a lot of times here, we're near line 300. So a lot of times you'll get a bunch of different variable assignments. It'll get very confusing. Sometimes you'll get up like to like 30 or 50 that are all variable, because someone was very sloppy in their coding and they didn't scope it all the way out. But for this one, let's just go ahead and do this one. And so we're going to add the scope here, and I'm just going to copy one of the other assignments up here, and then I'm going to kill off the other scopes, because I'm just doing that one. And I think I might have named it like scope JS scope, or the JavaScript scope, or I probably should anyway. The name doesn't really matter. What matters, it might. I'm not an expert on the total thing here, but we know that it's a scope. Oh yeah, it has to be a scope, because then that's the name. Okay, so it does need to be a scope. Let me just copy that for safety's sake in case I made a typo. Okay, so that's we've copied an existing one, and then according to this, that um, string is assigned this scope, and so we've pasted that scope in here right there. And if for some reason you have that bunched in, let's say that it's been being covered, like if I go over to that HTML file, okay, so there's a lot of blue in here, right? And that's because someone just went across and just went blue the whole way. But let's say that you want your image tag to be something else. What you'll end up with is a bunch of tags, scopes, stacked in a single encapsulation here. And so it'll just go, and it'll just say, like, look, all of this stuff is blue. And that's okay if that's what you want to do. But then if you find one that you want to change, one in particular, like that image title or the body tag or whatever, it'll be grouped in there. So that's another reason. Then if you find it in there, just cut it out and move it to the one that you're about to make now, and then that's what solves that problem for you, because it will take the one that comes first. It won't take the ones that succeed after that, because then that's a conflict of those two scopes, and so you have to keep your scopes straightened out, only one per page. Because this is an example of when I was using a third-party pack, all the scopes were on a single page, and so yeah, at times that was more convenient, but I understand the logic in this other one that we're working with now. So let's go back over here, find that scope that I was using here. Let's just go back under the scope. See, what is that? Control P into scopes and variable, and find that thing. That was in plus, so we need to go down to plus. Oh, it was near line 300, yeah. Okay, so it didn't exist. Forgot about that. Was it, yeah, or was it, yeah. How do you, gotta get back over to, here, gonna kill off framer syntax, because I don't need it. Okay, so it was near line 300, and so that's where this lived, putting the scope in there, the one that didn't exist. This didn't exist. So after that, then let's just put it in some blazing color. There is an extension here. You have to wait for it. Let's just put that in just piss yellow, just to make a point of it, and then save that. So after that's been saved, then we reopen Visual Studio Code, get back into that folder, and it'll reopen the stuff for us. This language pack is pretty heavy. Hopefully yours won't be as bad. Okay, and so now you can see that as is a nice piss yellow for us. And so that's how you really trace it down. After a little bit of practice, you'll be changing colors. Probably take you less than an hour to get everything the way you want. But this took me a long time to figure that out, because there's no guides to any of it, especially when it comes to a scope that doesn't even exist. Because it's like, how did you define it when it doesn't even exist? And that was probably a result of the language pack that I have installed. And so I'm not sure about that or not. And so what I'm just going to do is redo that, because I had saved that, and I'm of course not going to want to have to deal with that work again before I forget. Okay, so I just pasted that back in from where I had saved it, and as you can see, I got further along in that JavaScript file where I wanted to change this one and this one, but not necessarily these, to break it up a little bit. And so one was variable object variable other object property, other and then just object. And then I just guessed at it. I just totally guessed at it being JS because it was the file type. And so you end up doing that with JS, CSS, etc. Because if I take those off it, that's where it actually originally started. So these details was very, very tedious, figuring all this out, when to apply an extension, when not to, because a lot of times your language pack will install that for you, and so that's where you can see that it fails. And so when we go in here, well, it's not failing, it's just a different scope than we thought. And so you can see that it was variable other object JS, and so that's not defined here properly over here until I add back the JS extension at the end. So let's look at that color here before we reload. Save it up. And then the shade of the color is only slightly different, but that did change. And so that's also how you'll make the differentiation between your different files, because what I had was like, let's go to the style CSS. So whenever the theme would come across a element that it basically didn't know what to do with, it would just assign it the blue style. And so let's go back into our TM inspector, and so you can see that this one here is just entity. That's it. That's all it was. And before I named it out to being CSS, it was just entity. That's all it was. And so I had to create the entity name tag .css. I created that style just so I could change that body tag, because the default theme didn't have it defined, and anything that was not defined automatically got shaded the default entity color, which was blue. And so I hope this helps you guys out, because it's just a lot of hunting and pecking. But now that you've seen the whole process and understand that, look, just find the style, assign the style. If it doesn't exist, create it, and then assign it. And that's the end of it. So good luck, guys.